This is Maxine Doogan and Domina L, and we are interviewing Julie Bates from Australia today. We thought it would be prudent to talk to somebody in another country who has gone through some of the stuff that we're going through here in the Bay Area. And what we're going through here in the Bay Area has to do with the police departments are being caught in a corrupt scandal where they have had, some of them have had sex with an underage woman who was working as a prostitute. And they were doing that, or at least she was doing that she has publicly stated, in exchange for protection. So protection from being arrested for prostitution, protection from violent predators who, were chasing her. Originally in her statement to the public, she said that she met the first officer she had a sexual relationship with when she was running from a violent pimp on the street. So, she was looking for all kinds of protection. And, one of the things that has led to the decriminalization of prostitution, or the change in the legal status in Australia, where Julie is this type of corruption. And so I just really want to appreciate Julie for joining us. She's an out sex worker and has been a harm reduction advocate and a sex worker rights advocate for more than a quarter of a century. She served on the Australian National Council on HIV and played a role in the consolidation of Australia's early HIV and AIDS response. And since the early pandemic, in the legal environment where the criminalization for many aspects of sex work, she openly rejected the stigma and the prejudice that she had personally experienced and her other colleagues in the early 1980s. And that helped gain government funding and resurrected the Australian Prostitutes Collective, which was the forerunner to the Sex Worker Outreach Project, New South Wales. Confronting some of the biggest brothel owners in Sydney with the reality that in the context of HIV transmission, their businesses would suffer unless they adopted a rigorous safe sex policy and practices. And these efforts underpinned and improved work conditions and practical support for safe practices before decriminalization. So today, Julie is a board member of Harm Reduction Australia and heads up a town planning and health and safety business, providing specialist services to sex workers and other key players. She is a lobbyist for maintaining decriminalization in New South Wales and better practices for local government responses, and contributes to the social research projects that investigate and helps benefit decriminalization and reduce harms in association with criminalization in the mixed legal regulatory responses to sex work in Australia. So thanks for joining us, Julie. You've been around a long time. Can you tell us about what led to the change of the legal status for sex workers in Australia?
Okay, well, first of all, good evening, America, and thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. For us, it's been a very, very long and windy road, a very, very long journey. And of course, it has involved much activism from sex worker rights and our allies. It's involved a number of government inquiries and a lot of research. So based on all of that over the last 30 years or so, in 1995, we finally achieved what we call partial decriminalisation of sex work, and I'll explain the partial bit in a while. But the journey starts in late 1970s, where there was social justice issues that were coming to the fore, and people were starting to say some of these laws. It was a thing called the Summary Offences Act that impacted on people who had no means of support, i.e. were vagrants and street-based sex workers and the like. And so with a lot of activism back in those days, and I don't mean necessarily from sex workers, I mean from social justice advocates, feminists and some sex workers who were all of the above, of course, because we're everywhere and we've always been everywhere. They repealed much of that Summer Offences Act, and it was almost by kind of chance and accident, really, in a way, but suddenly street-based sex work became decriminalised. And so in 1979, street-based sex work was decriminalised, and basically you could work anywhere on the streets in Sydney. Of course, street-based sex work had traditionally centred around kind of the inner city of Sydney. In fact, sex work has existed in that locale since colonisation of Australia back in 1788. So that went along very nicely for a number of years. And of course, in tandem with that, brothels were still in existence, and they were deemed illegal, and keeping a brothel was an illegal activity. And so all of these places were functioning under the guise of a massage parlour, if you like. And at this time we had the Vietnam War, and we had lots of American brothers and sisters and soldiers from your part of the world coming to Australia for what we called R&R. And so suddenly there was this blossoming of the sex industry in Sydney. It was wonderful. I came for a holiday at that time and met one of your lovely young soldiers and had I must say, a 3-week dalliance, if you like, for free. Moving along a little bit, we've got street-based sex work. Brothels still existed, except they were known as massage parlours, health studios, you name it, and that was the only way you could exist in those days. And the reason it existed is because police corruption. That's the only way it existed. So that continued along. Street-based sex work, in about 1984, they came back and had another go at the Summary Offences Act because of some actions and activities from local residents who thought that street-based sex work was bringing down the tone of the neighbourhood, They then brought in another small tweaking of that act that said, okay, street-based sex work is still quite legal, but you can't work within view of a school, a church, a house or a hospital. So that bit of that law still exists. But street-based sex work is still alive and well, although it's, it has a diminishing existence because of social media and other ways people now can work. You don't have to stand out in the street all night and freeze your tits off. You can, have a profile somewhere in social media and have a mobile phone. But that was happening then, and so in the early 80s, another inquiry was set up in this state, not specifically about police corruption, but this was about sex work per se. And some of the city fathers thought that sex workers were getting a pretty bad deal, and maybe there's a way to improve the outcomes for sex workers. So what happened then is that inquiry, where a number of my contemporaries at the time presented before the inquiry, along with lots of our incredibly staunch allies that stand with us still to this day, 30 years on, and told that inquiry exactly what it was like to be a sex worker in this state and what was needed. So that inquiry made some of those first recommendations that we should decriminalise sex work, or decriminalise the keeping of brothels and all of the raft of laws that went with it. I must just say, it has never been illegal per se to be a sex worker in Australia, ever. It's all of the other laws that surround it. So that inquiry also made recommendation that perhaps the way to go is to regulate brothel keeping, or the bricks and mortar, if you like, as one does any other business, such as, an accountant's business or a dental surgery or a doctor's surgery. So that was the start of starting to think about, if you decriminalise it, what then do you do next? So that was that first thing. The two wonderful things that came out of that inquiry, called the Rogan Inquiry, was that the sex work organisation of which I was working for at the time with my colleague then, Roberta Perkins, the recommendation was that we be funded. And so it came to pass. And that organisation, the Australian Prostitutes Collective, continues on today, but under a different mantle. You may know of SWAP, Sex Worker Outreach Project. But the Prostitutes Collective was the forerunner, and it was funded. It's still funded to the tune of $1 million and something a year. Does wonderful work. And the other important recommendation was that a primary health care service be funded to address the primary health care needs, not necessarily sexual health, but primary health care needs of marginalised people, including street-based sex workers and others that were doing it a bit tough. Came to pass an organisation called Kirkton Road that still exists today also continued to be funded, that provides this wonderful service to marginalised folk and for sex workers. They even now have a specialist sex worker clinic as well. So that all happened. It's wonderful. But we move along even a bit further and into the early 90s, and finally the government decides that, yes, we do have some major issues with corruption amongst the constabulary in this state, and we've known this for decades. And corruption went into high places to people in high government positions as well, because you can't have police corruption at one end without it feeding in and back and forward from a higher place. And that was the case, and we knew that through most of the 50s and 60s of corruption in government. But anyway, so here we have a police inquiry. It was a royal commission. It wasn't just any old government inquiry. It was a royal commission, very serious. Numbers of people were summoned to appear before that commission, whether they liked it or not. And so what you had was brothel owners and the like being summoned to that inquiry. I was out of the country at the time, so I missed that inquiry. It was the only inquiry I've actually missed. But the end result of that was that they found that corruption was so rife in the sex industry that there was nothing for them to do except to decriminalise it. And so in 1995, it came to pass. And so what happened is, finding that kind of pervasive police corruption, they removed police as regulators. As if it's a criminal act, then the police are regulators. So when they decriminalised it, they effectively removed the police as regulators, and they then handed the regulatory response of brothel keeping, or bricks and mortar, if you like, of brothels and the keeping of brothels and what have you, to local councils. So like any other business, you want to be an accountant or you want to set up a dental practice or whatever, you're able to apply to your local council, and technically you're meant to be able to get the consent to go ahead and set up that business. But therein lies the crux of the problems that we sit with today. And without any education going down for councils to understand their new regulatory role, they set about developing planning controls and asking the government to, in fact, even give them dispensation to say, this local council area doesn't want brothels and we want the right to refuse them all. The state government, who had deemed brothels a legitimate land use, just get on with it, finally buckled under pressure and agreed that these councils could relegate the land use of brothels to industrial zones. And so that's what we've got today now, which is very sad to say that most councils permit it in one zone only, and that's an industrial zone. Now, we fight back against that and continue to fight, because you've got a largely female workforce there sitting out in an industrial boondock. After 6 o'clock at night when people go home, it's a very dangerous place to be. So that's our current fight. We're continually fighting with government to change that kind of...
That's one of the things that, Julie, is that, our concern is that, brothels, even in the legal setting in Nevada, I drove through Carson City, Nevada, where Carson City is actually the capital of Nevada, the state of Nevada. And the legalization there says that small counties can license brothels. And in Carson City, the 3 brothels there are located together. They're basically on the same lot. They're located down a dirt road and basically in the middle of a very large junkyard. And so, when we're thinking about regulation schemes or licensing schemes for, workspaces, we need to make sure that we're not relegated, as you said, to, places where there's no street lights. You can't walk to a bus stop. There's no buses running at night. There's no access to public transportation. And, it makes it difficult for clients to be able to get into some of these outlying areas too. So yeah, those would definitely be big concerns for our population here in America, is that type of zoning, trying to zone us out of business. Yeah.
I guess at least here in Sydney, sex workers can go home at night. It's a perhaps 10-minute taxi fare to the local station, so you're not having to live there and stay there for weeks on end. So there are brothels in 1 or 2 or 3 brothels in every suburb in Sydney. So, but it's not optimal. Some councils have permitted them to be in commercial precincts, which, as I say, is the natural habitat of brothels, as they used to always be above shop tops, and what have you, or even on the ground floor. And ground floor is really important when you're talking about giving access to people with disability. They can't get up those stairs, which was how back in some past time, councils actually said, we'll approve you, but you've got to be upstairs, downstairs. You've got to be out of sight, basically, out of sight, out of mind. Well, we work very, very closely with an organisation called Touching Base, www.touchingbase.org.au, which is a wonderful organisation that's been around for 16 years that brings sex workers, my marginalised group, with the other marginalised group of people with disability, working with their carers and what have you. We run training programs to train service providers to understand how now, under a decriminalised environment, it's not illegal to seek the services of a sex worker or go to a brothel or come to a private worker's home. We run training programs for sex workers too, who, we've been seeing people with disability forever, but we've just formalised this now. And it's really good to have that extra training. If I'm going to see someone with a spinal injury and they have a colostomy bag or a catheter, what kind of things do I need to know to manage those aspects? Or you're working with someone with cerebral palsy or with some kind of intellectual disability. So we run those training programs 3 or 4 times a year. We work with the service providers. So we have a database. So sex workers who want to provide service to people with disability are on that database, and someone will ring the database and say, hello, I'm ringing on behalf of my client Jim, and we'd like someone to come to the home. I personally, getting being a bit more of a mature person these days, I see people of octogenarians in the nursing home, and I'm called in by the adult daughters who are the same age as me to come and see their dads, and I think that's just amazing and wonderful. And the staff in the hospitals are kind of pretty keen to have this happen too. So I have the red carpet rolled out to me. I have the nursing unit management welcoming me. I'm given a nurse assistant, because I have a no lift rule, who's there waiting for me outside the door if I need to lift and turn and dress and shower the client. So sometimes when you have dementia too, you become a bit disinhibited, and so you're a bit more sexually kind of focused, and some of these poor old guys go down to happy hour and want to sort of do things that they think are inappropriate in the company of other people in the home. So anyway, so that's a bit of an aside, but it's an important aside because it's something that you can do when you decriminalise the industry. So everybody wins, and so that's one aspect of it.
Well, I just wanted to maybe ask more of a clarifying question, because it would be so germane to what's going on here in the Bay Area with the investigations of this particular police department, and the fact that some of their policemen had sex with this woman who was under 18. She was working as a as a sex worker, that investigation is being conducted by the actual police department itself. And that's kind of how things work here in America, is that the actual police department, when there is a violation that is brought to their attention, or more specifically brought to the attention of the public in this case, then that triggers, the investigation. And so when you talk about inquiries that, where the corruption had been well known, for decades in Sydney, what kind of format did those inquiries take?
Well, it required sort of, friends in high places. We have friends in high places too, and that is political parties and people, representatives of the people representing certain political parties. And I have to say, our last inquiry that brought in decriminalisation was a bipartisan response to it. So both sides of the aisle, if you like, agreed and supported decriminalisation. But what you need to have some champions of the rights of marginalised people. You need to have people who really, really support the notion that sex workers have been treated very badly and that they need a voice and they need decriminalisation. So we worked with particular politicians and parliamentarians who supported that, and that's how it came about. So, but you can't have police investigating themselves. No more than you can have police as enforcers of the sex industry. You can't keep your dick in your pants. You have no business being involved in any kind of enforcement or policing. But look, I just want to say that police cannot be enforcers and protectors at the same time. It's just not possible. They should not investigate themselves. And something as serious as this should be telling the authorities in America and your part of the world that there's something very rotten and they need to do something about it. They need to remove police as regulators. They're just not capable of policing crimes, of this nature. And it should not be a crime. Sex work should not be a crime. So if you remove the police, and one of my biggest concerns is that while police are sort of policing this, the broader sex industry, it's detracting them from genuine policing and policing genuine cases of trafficking and coercion and abuse. So that's where they should be focusing. No special laws. There are laws already to do that and to protect people, but they should not be policing us. And this case in America now is something that I reckon would have triggered an inquiry here in New South Wales. It would have been a major driver. So,
Yeah, all that we're hearing about at the public level is that, they ended up appointing, they're on police chief number, I guess they had to dismiss their third police chief over in Oakland, a couple days ago. So they are without a police chief. They've been through, they've dismissed 3 police chiefs in 9 days. So just, it is a big problem. And, San Francisco here, we have major problems with the police shooting people, killing people, and getting away with it. So there is a big need to have, to push for a larger inquiry. But I just don't know that, that type of inquiry would be at the state level. For the state to make that inquiry would just really be unprecedented. And
you need to find friends in Parliament in your state.
Yeah, no, we don't have that. Nobody wants to expose, really extent of police corruption and the duplicity of police trying to enforce laws by having sex with people, because they get to have sex with us under the guise of arresting us for prostitution, also under the guise of rescuing us as sex trafficking victims. So, that's going to be counterintuitive for anybody in our situation who needs to report that we have been a victim or a witness of crime to go to police and make those reports in good faith that the police are going to investigate those crimes, you know. And as this particular situation demonstrates, it's really that the police, their priority is about having sex with us. That's their priority. And there's just nothing that's going to stop that. Unfortunately, decriminalization would help, because in this particular case, if this particular worker, regardless of her age, you know, she were not afraid of going to the police and expecting some relief, and instead the police ended up having, you know, sex with her as a means to protect her from other police arrests for prostitution, and you know, that's where we're at. So. Well, thanks for sharing what happened. Go ahead.
And decriminalisation is a major driver of stigma and abuse. It validated our decades-long fight for sex work to be recognised as legitimate and valued work, and for us to be treated with respect and have the same labour and legal rights as others. And I hope that perhaps you can use the Amnesty International's policy now that calls for decriminalisation for these very reasons. Someone needs to hit them off.
I don't think nobody cares about amnesty. Nobody cares about amnesty here. I mean, you know, we have the court case challenging the criminalization of prostitution here in California. You know, the courts, the judges are our only hope at this point. They're our only place where we're going to get relief. You know, we have tried working with legislators. We have tried, you know, ballot measures. You know, none of the usual political mechanisms of enfranchisement of democracy are available to us. So, you know, this is our last hope.
Hear that, Maxine. I'm just so sad, and it is a terrifying place for you people to be, quite frankly.
Well, this is life here in the United States, and this is life, you know, for our you know, the people in our occupation. And, you know, it's just a miracle that we are able to get by every day, and we're able to, you know, bring all the happiness to our customers and to our community members and our families. And we hope to be able to change our legal status through our court case. But yeah, it would be great if there were some sort of inquiry that legislators and people in authority took seriously this particular matter. But, you know, their response to it is, you know, to investigate themselves, which is failed policy, and to continue the failed policies of criminalization without changing anything, and just, you know, calling a couple of cops bad apples and, you know, dismissing them, you know, shoving everything under the rug. That's business as usual here in America.
I don't think it's just a couple of cops. Sitting here in Sydney, Australia, every week I'm confronted by the abuse of police in America against sex workers. So, you know, it's not just a couple of bad apples.
Yeah, it's systemic. It's a systemic problem, and the criminalization of prostitution plays a major role in the underpinnings of this particular corruption that's so tolerated here. It's true. Okay, so well, thanks, Julie, for taking the time to speak to us and give us some good information. We're going to look forward to seeing you in New Orleans at the Desiree Alliance. That'll be happening in July. And we'll catch up with you later. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks, Domina L, for being our engineer today. Did you have any words you wanted to say, Domina L?
Well, it's fascinating to hear you talking about how things are in your region of the world, and I just hope that one day the United States would be able to, you know, say similar things, you know, like going into a care home and being able to facilitate something that really is so important and so valuable. So it's fascinating. Thank you for sharing and for being here.
My pleasure.
Awesome.